Today, I have a conversation with Marilyn Kostuch. We discuss agriculture, more specifically precision agriculture, and how that can reduce waste, increase profits, and improve environmental impact. All of this and more on today's episode of the Justice Podcast. Everybody wants to talk, but nobody wants to listen. So here's my petition. Instead of division, let's make our mission to change the system. Learn how the world works. Learn how we can act. Welcome, everybody, to the Justice Podcast. How did you first get involved in agriculture?
Okay, well, I was pretty young when I started. I wasn't the, grow up on the farm kind of girl. I actually grew up in a city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my mom got really involved with the equestrian area, so like horses and all that kind of stuff. And she just brought me to the farm constantly because she didn't know what else to do with me. So the biggest thing I guess I learned there was a huge work ethic. Just something about like being in the barn and like taking care of animals and being with people that just have no sense of hourly, like, 9 to 5 type of thing. Like I'd get there at 4 a.m. and we'd leave at 9. And that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it was just like I didn't know any other way to live. And now I think it's kind of been ingrained in me a little bit. Like I don't really understand the hourly thing. I'm trying to get better at it, but it's fine. But I really, really, really enjoy the work ethic that farmers bring, and they're always trying to like figure something out. Like if this isn't working, then we gotta go to plan B and then plan C and then plan D. And there's just this like overlay of that I really, really enjoy in the industry. Um, and that kind of what drove me to get a major. So I went to UW River Falls and I got an agricultural business major. Um, and then I started looking for work outside, and I actually couldn't find something directly into the ag industry. There was kind of like a short recession right in at the end of 2016 going into 17. There was a little bit of a job lapse, and some people couldn't find jobs coming out of college. So I ended up working for my family's business. My family, which my stepdad owns a CNC tool and die shop. I ended up doing everything there. So from sawing to programming to shipping, receiving, and I got a business major, so I ended up doing all the accounting. But I got a lot of, I got my feet wet really, really quickly, just in everything involved with business. Um, and he knew my passion was agriculture, and like he could, like I would still go to the barn after work. I'd get off at 3 o'clock and I'd be there until 9. And he's just like, you can come home at a decent time now. And I'm like, I don't really know how to do that. So I just he knew that was my passion, so then I just kind of stuck with looking for a job. And there's a local mill right across the street from this is Farmers Implement where I work, which is a Case IH dealership. And I ended up calling the wrong number. Sounds really dumb, but I called instead of calling the mill, I called the implement dealership, and they're like, "Actually, we have jobs open." And I was like, "Okay, what kind of jobs do you have?" And he's like, the manager at the time was like, "Well, there's this one job. It's they call it the AFS technology person." And I'm like, "That's the title, actually?" And he's like, "No, it's AFS like specialist." I was like, "Well, I'm not a specialist in anything, so I can't really tell you that, but I guess I can interview for it." So I interviewed for it, and obviously there's not a lot of training in between there. But I ended up getting the job because a lot of my previous university work we did with it's called big data. Big data is like cloud like transfer. It's similar to like Google Photos or anything that you can transfer over the like the interwebs, and it just like automatically downloads. Big data is a big thing that's coming up in farming, where the information that's stored in the tractor, like if you're planting, spraying, have any type of implement attached, um, that data or coverage data is actually transferred over the cloud to their own internet, so they can view their own prescriptions and they can manipulate certain things. There's a lot to it, obviously, but that's kind of the idea behind big data. Farmers want to become more knowledgeable about what they're putting into their field. They want to become more knowledgeable, like what's happening around them. Like they have even wind data, and it sounds ridiculous, but if you're a sprayer and there's somebody who's trying to make a claim on you saying that they sprayed in their field, they have to have, data that shows, hey, like there was no wind at the time, like this isn't from us, this isn't, there's a lot of insurance behind it. And I think farmers are coming into contact with this technology and they're really running with it when they get it. So I think it's pretty cool in that respect. Anyway, I kind of veered off into a different aspect of it. But yeah, so I got the job, did a lot of training, and now my job is basically to supply people with the technology to get them basically more level with what the world is becoming. So yeah. Anyway.
There's so much I want to dive into with that.
Okay, so I'm
Um,
like, I don't really know where to start. This is a big topic.
no, it is. It's a huge topic. Do you feel like there's anything from your time in the CNC shop that you bring with you into your job now?
I think there's just like the componentry and knowing how the supply chain works. Um, because we worked with raw materials at the CNC shop. We developed them, we prototype, we got a company who usually sends like a contract, gives us a blueprint, says like this is what we need made. And because our tool and die shop was a little bit more interesting, it was a prototype tool and die shop, which is not really common. Um, we would work with huge companies like Paper Machinery Corporation, which makes huge components for McDonald's cups, actually. And then we would make like John Deere equipment. We would make Husco International, which is like a big in the automotive industry. They make robots that actually, put the line up on any type of larger pieces that people can't do. Um, so it's a bunch of different, industries coming into one and basically saying like, hey, we need this made. How do you make it? And there's a big process behind it. There's the actual raw material. There's the engineering behind it. There's talking to the engineers. There's talking to the CNC programmers and saying, hey, is this even possible? And just that communication line, I think, brought a huge like awakening to me because in this industry it's very similar, but it's just we get cut in the fact like we don't get to talk to the engineers. We kind of get thrown the products and then we see if they're usable and then we talk to the technicians and say this isn't really working for us. And so that's kind of, I think, what the biggest takeaway I learned. And I'm glad it wasn't like an eye opener when I got here because I think more money would have been lost that way. So just knowing, I think that was probably the biggest thing.
So can you explain a little bit more about what you do now?
So, precision agricultural sales specialist. So I primarily sell Trimble and Case IH products. So Trimble they're big into like water management, scaling and stuff like that. I work more on the side of auto guidance. So I put systems in tractors that help them steer themselves so that we can actually, the steering themselves makes the line straighter, obviously, but it helps with yield. So like we can make sure that, this pass with the planter that's 12 rows, for example, is coming in and coming out at the same width. So let's say it's 30-inch rows, 30, 30, 30 goes all the way down the field. Versus like if somebody's driving, they could like veer and then they end up planting in interplanting like this. And you actually lose a lot of yield doing that because then there's plants like to when they grow on top of each other, it's a fight rather than just grow naturally. And you want the yield to be as big as you can because seed costs a lot right now and fertilizer costs a lot right now. In fact, there was a huge fertilizer like shortage, quote unquote, that happened. And so a lot of farmers were end up quadrupling the price of what they used to spray. So I've had a lot of sprayer guys come to me recently. And what the cool part about precision ag is that it'll do like auto row shutoffs or planters, the same thing, row shutoff. So you'll come if you are planting, typically you come around the field like twice, and then use that, whatever around the field you use, you turn around on. And then you can make sure that you're not overspraying or overplanting. So it actually shuts the unit off when you come to the end automatically with GPS, and then it'll, when you come back on, it'll re-engage and you don't have to do anything. Before it was all manual, so and you can't see where you're planting. Like if you're coming in with a planter, you see the lines that your tires are making. You don't see where anything else is going. A lot of guys use this long rod that comes off of the planter and then they drive on that line. But this kind of takes that out of the picture so that all they have to do is press the engage button and everything's working. So all they have to do is worry about what's happening behind them. If something clogs up, then they're on it faster. They don't have to do 5 different things at once. So it gives the operator, if a guy's doing, for example, 2,000 acres, that's a lot. And you get to like midnight and you're tired and you might mess something up and you don't realize you messed it up until 2 weeks later when you see them planting and like everything's growing up. So it's mostly environmental what I do. You less seeds, less spraying on the field means it's better overall for the environment. You shouldn't be spraying more than you need to. It's just it's costs too much. It's really it's not great for the environment, like runoff and such. But it is necessary because right now in the conventional farming industry, like there's not really another option unless you decide to go into like more conservative options like no-till or cover crops, which takes about 10 years to fully integrate into your system. So it's just there's a lot to it in that way. So basically I do the auto guidance, the row shut-offs, and I do any help with the cloud data, like transferring data over, and I help my salesmen operate the Case IH tractors because a lot of them are brand new. They have like basically touchscreen like monitors on their in their cab, so a lot of them don't really know how to use it. And I'm just there for support, basically.
That's so interesting that you mentioned, okay, so it helps yield, and also the environmental impact, the benefit from that. That's are there any other benefits that come from these products?
I mean, the fatigue, like just in general with guys, people have been able to plant more, especially in the bigger operations. Um, I guess those are the 3 main ones we kind of focus on. I'm sure there's other benefits to it as well. Just integrating technology in general, I think, is a great thing because you can actually like manage your data. So year to year, you can see like, okay, we're spraying less this year, or we can like actually visualize what's been happening year to year versus just like, let's just see what happens. Because this industry is way too risky to do something like that. And I'm surprised like more people haven't like become more on board with it. But I think technology is a bit of a scary thing to integrate, especially I mean the average farmer's age is like 63. And that's baffling to me because it's like, well, next 5 years, a lot of people are retiring. So that means either people are going to supersede them, like their sons or whatever. And I mostly work with the generation probably a little bit older than me, like the 30s, and that's their sons or their daughters. And I work close with them because they want to start putting technology into the field and they realize and recognize how important it is to know what you're putting into your production and your crops and like what's happening, because one day they're going to figure out that this data is actually like it's necessary and it has to happen because insurance is probably going to require it one day. And I'm having a feeling that the government is going to require it one day too, just like knowing how much anhydrous is going on, knowing how much of this is going on. Because right now, like farmers sometimes have their own, they just kind of get to choose what they want to do. And I think by incorporating all of this, and they're just going to be more prepared for what to expect in the future. So, and I know that sounds like a little bit of like, I'm foreseeing the future, but I've had a lot of questions about like carbon credits, and it's been a program that's I think come about in the last 5 years, and it's basically the amount of emissions that are going out into the air, and people are trying to say, hey, do you have carbon credits available? Like, are you available? Because you can actually get money back from the government if you don't emit as much. So like, there's that too, and you need to record that. So you have to find a way to do that, and technology is really the only way to do that. So, um, I guess that may be another thing environmentally for the emissions. Yeah, there's a lot going. Like I feel like when I tell these things, it's like, oh, it's kind of like up in the air, but it is a little bit because we're just kind of like making products and seeing like where they go in the ag industry. Yeah, there's fundamental purpose behind it, but like whether or not it'll take off is another thing because I've found that the older farmers just don't really want to snag onto anything, but the younger ones do. But the older ones are ones that have the money to purchase these things. So it's a lot of convincing between the generations. And I think once you see the older generations kind of move away from the farm, there's going to be like a drastic change in technology. It's going to move forward like so much. Like there's precision classes now in college, and that was never there. And I graduated in 2016, and they didn't have precision classes, and they have majors now in precision. And so just in, 5, 6 years, they already have people like coming out of school with degrees in it. And it's crazy to me. So it's something's gonna be happening, and ag industry is gonna be something you should look at. So it's pretty cool.
That is really cool. Um, how do you bridge that gap between generations, or is it really just a waiting game?
Um, I think, you know, it's just kind of just letting them know like what the benefit is. They want to see the money side of it. Like a lot of older farmers are like, well, what are we getting out of this? Like what profit margin? And there is a substantial ROI like gap that happens when people actually use precision. Like because you're using less seed to plant and you're still getting more seed at the same time. So let's just put this in perspective. If I plant corn and it's not at the correct, like, if I don't space it correctly and I space it like too narrow, I could lose the plant here, but gain the plant over here. And I still end up with the same yield because this one's going to die. So I'm planting less and I'm planting with like more space. So like you get more yield out of one cob if you get two, because you can actually get two heads if you have more space. And when you're planting, if it's not like doing the correct job or like it accidentally doesn't singulate correctly, you can actually like you lose money from the seed and you lose money from the spraying. And if the guy sees that, hey, this piece of equipment can, minimize that and it can show for that, um, they're more eager to be on the ball game, but they're not the ones that want to operate it. So that's kind of where the younger generation comes into play. And they're like, well, I can do whatever. I can learn it. I can figure it out. We can put it together. We can put it on together. But like, I think when they figure out that their only job is to pay for it and not operate it, I think that's kind of when it goes through. But if you find that, you have a farm that has 3 brothers and they're all older, that's when you kind of get in a little bit of hiccup because they want it, but they're also like, I don't really feel comfortable operating it. And a lot of the times is like they're afraid to push buttons, whereas our generation is like, or even the younger generation, like even 40s and stuff, they look at their smartphone, they're like, oh, it's not working, let's touch it. Like that's not something that they do. They look at it and they're like, oh, that looks like a problem, maybe don't touch it for now. So that there's just the knowledge gap there, and just how to problem solve and troubleshoot is just a little bit different. They're more mechanically inclined, and they understand the in-depths of the tractor and the inner workings of that. But then at the same time, they're just like, they look at the monitor and they're like, how can this button turn this off? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, just try it, see what happens. And that just sometimes doesn't connect. And I don't want to say like older farmers are not as smart. It's not that at all. In fact, they're incredibly wise with a lot of things. It's just in the the realm of things, the way that they were brought up, they didn't have smartphones. They didn't have that type of tactile technology, basically. A lot of it was, big black boxes and you push buttons and that's how you did it. So it's just a learning curve, and it's just trying to gap those people. If they want to learn it, I'm totally game for teaching them. If they don't want to learn it, you can't teach somebody who doesn't want to learn. So that's kind of the gap I run into, and the younger generation does a really good job of convincing, especially when they want it. So I think they do a big job in that when I do sales. So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, just thinking about digital natives versus people who have adopted the internet, and just even the divide that exists there in my own personal experience of helping people.
It
Yeah.
can be a headache, but it's also like it's reassuring that they're trying, and I do appreciate it when they do, especially because, I want the older generation to stay as long as they can, because they've done a good job in the egg industry for as long as it's been there. I think obviously we're moving into a different kind of egg industry, with more technology, with a little bit more data to like take hold of. They always say that the egg industry is like 20 years behind technically in technology. And I could see that, but it's also an expense thing. It's also, is it necessary thing. And the generation before is, the farms didn't have a lot of money. Like now they're a little bit different. They have a lot of money and they're buying new equipment and they're figuring things out. And so I think with that change of things and farms becoming bigger, they're going to need some type of technology to just innovate them a little bit more, at least have data to back them up on what they're doing, and have things that, you know, um, they didn't have before. So there's just the operation of a farm is just going to be a little bit different. So, yeah.
So maybe just as a final wrap up, is there anything about the future of agriculture that you think we need to be intentional on implementing?
Like as a farmer or as just people in general?
I guess just as a farmer, but maybe even just in policy, like what are some things that we need to try to push towards? And
I guess I'm pushing towards just understanding technology, understanding like what it has to offer, what it can do for your field or whatever. And instead of like being backed off by, big changes like this, just kind of grow with them. I think that, especially my industry, we kind of get like stuck in, our little box, and, we want to stay, comfortable. And I think we need to learn how to, grow a little bit more in the things that we have and the tools that we have. And um, I guess that would kind of be my takeaway, is just being a little bit more open on what what we already have that we could already use right now. So yeah, so that's, I think, the biggest takeaway.
awesome. Well, Marilyn, thank you so much. This was awesome. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners will
That's
too.
good.
This isn't financial, legal, or medical advice, but we do discuss how we might invest our resources for a healthier society. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic and other public policy issues, check out the website, thejusticepodcast.com.